Friends of the Youth Roundtable, viewers of the Civic Space TV, welcome to episode 32 of the Youth Roundtable. Today we are going to cast light on a very interesting topic, which is the military coups and democracy within Africa. We know that yes, Africa has had a fair share of history in terms of military struggles, but more so against white colonial rule. But we also know that in the past decade, in the last 10 years, Africa as a general has witnessed about 42 military coups. Some have been successful, some have ended as being mere attempts. Today we are here to cast a light that is this the new form of African democracy? Because at least we know that in the last couple of years, Africa began to witness a fair share of democratization. But it looks like we're taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps backward. So we are here to appreciate the value of democracy and to understand the role of military coups and how they affect the democracy of our lovely continent, Africa. And to help us understand and appreciate this, I'm joined by a panel of young and very intelligent young people. And I take this opportunity to introduce them. And I'll begin from my extreme right. To the extreme right is my good friend and comrade, Mr. David Oyet. David Oyet is the executive premier and founder of Innovate, which is, I understand, a social organization that deals with creative thinking and empowering of young people. David Oyet, you're most welcome to the show, and you can say hello to our viewers.
Thank you, Moses, and appreciate the invitation. I can't wait to share and also learn from all the panelists in the show. To the viewers, this is a very good topic. It's something that we must pay close attention to. I know that we have always left some of these conversations to only the politicians, but even if you're not interested in politics, you're interested at least in the growth of your country.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm glad that right next to you is a politician by the name of Comrade Roy Rugumayo. Roy Rugumayo is the Secretary General of the Uganda National Students Association. Sir, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Comrade Kidega. You know, when I type in my phone, Comrade, the keyboard brings Kidega. I'm very glad to be hosted at the Youth Roundtable on Civic Space TV. More so on the 32nd episode, when I am the 32nd Secretary General of the Uganda National Students Association. Very honored indeed to be sharing this platform with fellow young people of such intelligence.
Yes.
I look forward to this discussion that is long overdue. Indeed, we should have had this discussion way back when our democracies were birthed, so that 60 years down the road, we wouldn't be discussing a 2-week-old coup. So I'm very glad to be here, comrade.
Thank you. And I must say that you chose that shirt decisively. Because it's an African conversation. You thought of being African in nature.
Perhaps.
Yeah, many thanks. Yes, next to Comrade Roy is Comrade Apophia Komugabe. Apophia is the vice chairperson of the debate union of IUIU University. I also know that she is a 4th-year law student in the same institution. I also know that she's the chairperson of the yellow chapter of the students of IUIU. She's a first-timer, just like the 2 panelists, and Apophia, you're welcome. You can say hello to our viewers.
Okay. Thank you so much, Comrade Kidega. I'm so much honored to be part of this show, and I'm looking forward to learning from the submissions of everyone here. And it's a very interesting topic, and with the status of our country, it is very, very relevant. And I hope to share a lot about it and to learn more. And our viewers, let's keep the chat and learn from each other. I'll appreciate everyone's submission. Thank you so much for the invite.
You're welcome. Yes, Mugisha is the gentleman right next to me. Mugisha is a 4th-year law student at Canvendish University. He's equally a first-timer on the Youth Roundtable. You can say hello to our viewers.
Thank you very much, Moses. Hello, viewers. It's It's very intriguing about the topic that we're going to discuss today, a very interesting one. And we shall analyze the issues in regards to some of the issues that we shall raise concerning democracy. Are we going forward, or we are going backwards as a continent? And a lot of issues that we shall also learn from my fellow panelists. Thank you very much for the invite.
Thank you. Now, to our viewers, please feel free to put your comments on the comment section, but also feel free to like and subscribe to this channel so that you can get weekly updates of our conversations. Comrade Rugumayo, let me start with you straight away. Malawi, Chad, Sudan, Zimbabwe, Central African Republic, the list is endless. In the last 10 years, we have had about 43 either attempted or successful coups in Africa. What does this mean for us as a continent in terms of our democratic transition? Are we moving forward, or this is the new African norm of democracy? Because I'll tell you that there is a world leader who one time said that Africans must define their own democracy, their own human rights. So is this Africa defining its own democracy in terms of military coups?
Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
First, I would like to state that at no one time should any person or any generation normalize occurrences as coups, because be it coups, be it civil wars, any process of power takeover that is violent and that is characterized by the power of the gun over the masses or over authority itself is a recipe for disaster. Whether a coup, take for instance, against a regime like Amin's or a regime like Obote one, depending on how one would want to analyze that particular time in history, replacing it with another military regime is never a solution to any of the challenges that the army could have risen over. So, how do coups affect the progress of democracy? During such military action, insurgencies or coups, there is usually 90% of the time a breakdown of the actual fabrics that make society, civil society itself. Institutions like the churches, the schools, and mostly they break down, they close, embassies and all that. So at the end, when the waters settle, it's only one group that has actual power, and that is the armed group, with no other one to hold them accountable other than perhaps a section of another armed group. That is why you see where there have been coups, we've seen the rise of warlords, rebel leaders, okay, civil uprisings, secession struggles, because the only way to hold accountable a group that has come to power through the use of force at a time when the fabrics of society have broken down is through the use of force. And so the cycle continues. That is why out of the 56, 57 African countries, we've had at least 40 undergo military coups and yet others have had more than one coups, like Mali, like Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Egypt. I mean, people carry out coups against a transition council that came in after a coup. That's how bad it is.
Yes.
So, does this grow our democracy? Of course not.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. Is this a new form of democracy? No, it's not.
Certainly not.
Certainly not.
All right. Fair enough. Let me just bring in Comrade Apophia. Apophia, I'll tell you that the Western world, you know, in the early between 1918 to 1945, had their fair share of very, you know, challenging wars. There was the World War I, there was the Peloponnesian War, there was World War II, then they had the Cold War after. So it seems as if maybe Africa is still doing soul searching, and that yes, we are trying to transition into a democracy, but maybe we are still trying to do some soul searching. Because I'll tell you that in Sudan, a legitimate government was overthrown by General Abdel. I'll tell you that in Burkina Faso, okay, a legitimate government was overthrown by a military officer. What does this mean for rule of law? So, from your perspective, is this the new form of African democracy? But also, tie a note to the legal perspective and rule of law as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. To begin with, I'll begin with an answer. It's not even close to democracy. And a government which comes in power through coups, if it were for it to fight not other governments to take over in the same process, it would be better. But it is still hard. Why? Because when a government comes into power with through the might power of a gun, it is hard for such a government to rule not using the same. So, for example, in Africa, we are seeing that most of these countries that have assumed government, those governments which have been in power through coups, have really failed to exercise democracy. Yes, they have had several peace talks, several democracy shows and all that, but still they have failed to appreciate democracy. Why? Because they have come into power with a gun, and still they want to rule with it. And in the other way, we see that democracy has nothing to do with that. And if in any case they come into power and they want to exercise democracy, if they could only think of any other alternatives and put the gun down and look for peaceful transitions, look for peaceful rulings, and actually make the citizens feel that they're not subjected to fear. Because, for example, we see that in most African countries, the reality is the civilians hardly associate themselves with the soldiers of the country. Why? Because they feel the soldiers are superiors, because they're the reasons why the government came into power, and the civilians feel they have no say. Why? This is because they have been intimidated and they have put it in their minds that the only way to bring about peace is through use of guns, through brutality, through all those means. Mention them. But I think, in my perspective, if only, because we see that in Africa, basically they use these coups on government which have stayed in power for so long, or maybe which they are not okay with their leadership. But if only they could assume the government and make sure that they exercise democracy, which is hard. So if someone has come into power through the means of the military coups, will still want to exercise and rule by that. I wish if they take over through such means, they could respect democracy in any way and come up with means which will create peaceful transition. It would be better. And on the side of the rule of law, among the cores of rule of law, the major elements of rule of law, we look at equality of the people, we look at democracy, we look at independence of the different sects of government, which most of the governments ruled or which come into power through coups have failed to respect and appreciate. We really have to agree that in reality, the rule of law in Africa is still a lacking question.
It is still fragile.
Actually, I will say it is still growing, but its appreciation, it is at a lowest level. We shall appreciate the fact that, let me give an example, the Constitution of Uganda, we have these provisions, we have all those, and we have bodies which enforce. Rule of law would be in power if only there is the bodies meant to exercise or enforce rule of law are doing the same. But we find big challenges when, for example, the bodies meant to exercise this rule of law are playing a dumb game on such occasions, on such things.
Or they are tools to the oppressors.
Yeah,
and the military juntas that.
Yeah, I would not urge in that way. I would not say they are tools, but what there is a way people are personalizing their responsibilities than acting in accordance with a constitution or any law governing them.
Okay.
People feel they are superior than the law, which is not in any way part of rule of law. Not that everyone wants to use their knowledge, not the law.
Okay.
Yeah, that is the problem that we are finding, and rule of law is not very respected in Africa.
Thank you. I think I love the panels of Comrade Roy and Comrade Apophia. Thank you. Ndugu David. David, I have read from communist literature, and precisely Karl Marx. Karl Marx will tell you that time comes when the slave must organize itself to overthrow the master, or the serf must organize itself to overthrow the landlord. It is true that we had several African revolutionary leaders who fought against colonial rule. There are so many, the Samora Machels of Mozambique, the Kwame Nkrumahs of Ghana, there are so many. Kenneth Kaundas, the Mwalimu Julius Nyerere's, they fought against colonial rule. But Karl Marx tells you that whereas the slave is fighting against the master, the slave should be conscious not to create another class of masters. So could it be the case that, yes, whereas Africans successfully fought colonial rule, we created another class of civil oppressors? And that's why now there is the Wananchi, through maybe the military, are now organizing again to overthrow the masters who have become, their own oppressors. So in your perspective, do you think that this is more of Africans saying that we disagree with our maybe ways of doing things, and there is need for us to overhaul these systems and create a new brand of democracy and leadership? What's your own take on this?
Very interesting there, Kidega.
Yeah.
It's a very, very challenging topic.
Yeah.
A few years ago, when you transition from university, I think my colleagues or other youth who are still at school, they'll know that when you are at school, you have these expectations of a beautiful world, a job here, an uncle has asked for a CV, there's all sorts of promises. And then when you step in, then reality sets.
That's true.
And you struggle. I went through the same thing, having gone through the Ugandan system of education.
Yes.
And some time back, I was questioning myself, how would I want my life to be? What will I look back 70 years later, assuming I get to reach 70 years, But several things started coming in my mind, from the environment, how I'm being led by those who lead me, the business playground, how is it, the taxes. And I started having conversations with people and friends. And those conversations took me to some key older people, one in Europe, one in the US. He lives in Florida. And at some point, we started talking about leadership. We started talking about democracy. And now I come to your question and concern and to the topic of rule of law, democracy, coups. and how it comes about. And I learned one major important thing, that everything is about the interest. The interest of the people who lead the coups, and the interest of the people who abandon constitutionalism and continue to do what they do. When America fought for freedom, to which they celebrate up to date, and they got freedom, they upheld constitutionalism. And to Ugandans and people listening in other parts of, or watching us from other parts of Africa, I center my conversation and submission around interest of the groups. So the interest of the groups must be governed. If they don't, if their interests are not governed, then we get to have the same circles. The primary interest of the Julius Nyerere, the Kenneth Kaundas, were to let go of the system that the Europeans or the Arabs or the Frenchmen or wherever they set into Africa in the early days. And when we gained independence, we forgot that there was another group of people that led that fight. And that group of people, majority of them, are they were the initiators of the current constitutions we have in Africa.
Yes.
If you remember the constitutional review, that there were keyboard people who led the first. They were members of the Constituent Assembly.
Yes.
That reviewed the current Ugandan constitution.
1995.
And where was the money that sponsored that Constituent Assembly? Who were the key people that were in that group? Who were their leaders? You know, in the beginning, there was goodwill and good interest that we want to build a country. We want to reshape the nation so we can be like all those other countries that developed in the US and in the Europeans. Unfortunately, key leaders and across Africa, this is not only about Uganda, but several countries in Africa forgot the interest of the motherland, which is the countries that they're leading. And they decided to reshape things their way.
They took it personal.
In that group, they reshaped it their own way, the leaders. So you find that the constitution will favor the leaders their own way. And if it doesn't, then they do what they call, what do they call it? You're a lawyer. Amendments. So that it can favor them. You get it? While the people are held down at a gunpoint. So when you think of a rising, we're talking about 500,000 more deaths. And people don't want to die. So what will happen is that the guns will hold us down. So we do nothing. But when we define democracy, we say that power belongs to the people. But the people are held at ransom. They can't say anything. But then routinely they elect a parliamentarian who is supposed to help. But the same parliamentarian, after reaching the house, is also held at ransom. You know? With several other hooking factors.
So it's a vicious cycle.
So we get to be recycling ourselves unless we sacrifice and reprioritize the interest of the people and the motherland. Africa will always continue having these coups. And mind you, these coups are either relatives, son of a former president, like it was in Congo. They are like that. When are you leaving for me this thing? You know?
Yes.
So it's either the Speaker of Parliament, the Vice President, it's somebody, it's the wife, it's this, I want this. So that then, to conclude for this particular point, Moses, brings us at a difficult position, even when we are in front of the cameras saying what we say. But I keep asking myself, if their interest is wealth, I mean the leaders, say wherever Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, and all these other countries, if the interest is about accumulating wealth, haven't these people accumulated enough so that they can circle back and give the country back to the people?
Yeah,
so let's
fair enough.
I
think David has taken us to a very interesting perspective, which is the international relations. And I'll come to you, Mugisha. Mugisha, Otto von Bismarck, a couple of years ago, anchored a conference in Berlin. And that conference was set precisely to partition the resources in Africa. And the idea was that because initially they saw Africa as a dark continent, okay, they actually assumed that people didn't live in Africa. But they were interested in the resources that Africa had. So they therefore sat down and said, okay, Germany, you will take this, France, you will take this, Yeah, you know, so they partitioned Africa according to their interests. And David brings in a very important perspective to this conversation. And I have to believe that by now you've had a fair share of international relations in your due course as as a law student. Do you think what David is saying is actually one of the causes of insecurity and military coups in Africa? That it is to the interest of these Western powers to keep Africa at ransom, to keep Africa in conflict, so that whereas we are focusing on fighting ourselves, they are busy taking our minerals and resources. So just from David's perspective, could you pick it up from there?
Thank you very much, Moses. And actually, David has brought in a very pertinent and important issue. And that reminds me that we just had a coup d'etat actually in Chad. So I think it was last year, where the incumbent president Idris was killed when he had gone to the front line. And then they had a transitional military council, and actually it's his son Mahamat Idris that actually took over power.
Yes.
And you realize that it's taken as a coup, though there were questions in that regard.
Yes.
But at the same time, during his swearing in, the president of the Republic of France attended that swearing in. So you find that we have not had anything like that. Usually when we are having those inaugurations, we rarely have European leaders coming to Africa. I think it only happened during Nelson Mandela's inauguration. So it's really questionable. And going back to what he was saying, it seems the Western countries and as well as the former colonies still have interest in some of these countries. When you look at the trend of the countries that have been having this coup, when you analyze them critically, you may find that most of them are francophone.
Yes.
They were former colonists of France.
Yes.
So there is a question in that regard, and well, as well as I would like to analyze as well this same issue in regards to economic development. Does economic development precede democracy, or democracy should precede economic development? As Africa, I think we need to go back to the drawing table. We need to analyze the democracy and in regards to our economic stand. When you look at the aspect of democracy, it is something that it's a system that developed in Athens in the 4th century. But leave alone that, it is when you look at all the aspects of democracy, they're a bit of human rights, and they are basically inherent. As much as we gave it a name to be called democracy, but when you look at some of the facets that the panelists have been talking about, liberty, the right to life, and all that, most of these are they are to do with human rights, and they are God-given. They are really God-given. And we look at our constitution actually in Article 1, it also stipulates that actually people are sovereign, and the power belongs to the people, who should choose how they should be governed.
Yes.
So they should be governed at their own will and with consent. So we question really the interest of the Western countries in the politics on the African continent, and it seems they are not helping much. Even though we had independence, some of these countries 60 years ago or 70 years ago, we still have those issues that actually some of these revolutionists actually came to fight against. Yeah, and it's a pity that we are still having such challenges. But I think the main issue that we should be discussing is whether economic development should precede the democracy. When you look at some of the autocratic leaders here in Africa, they are being praised. They are being praised on the basing on the economic development maybe they have undertaken in their country. For example, Rwanda. I won't mention names, but you know, when you mention dry bones, it's the old people who always complain. So you realize that he's getting a lot of praise. But look at the democracy in Rwanda. Is it something that we can really stand about and say that Rwanda has democracy? But the fact that he's leading his country to economic development, everyone is praising him. So I think we ought to go back to the table and analyze really the economic status of our countries. And again, look at those countries that are having these coup d'etats: Mali,
Burkina
Chad,
Faso, Chad.
Senegal. Most of them really they're not performing well economically, and the recent pandemic didn't help much.
Yes.
Yeah, and when people elect some of these government officials into power, they're expecting some few things. It's a social contract.
Yes.
We have given you to lead us, but we expect this. We expect economic development.
Yes.
We expect there will be security. We expect that the standards of living will be better. So less than that, people will always revolt. People will always rise against the government.
Against poor governance.
Exactly. So
Yes.
governance is an issue. But again, we need to go back and look at economic development and democracy. What should we prioritize?
Thank you. And Comrade Roy, let me come to you. Our friend Echo has brought in a very important perspective, the issue of the economy versus, democracy. And to this, I'm forced to quote Dambisa Moyo. Dambisa Moyo, in her book Dead Aid, tells you that what Africa needs is not a multi-party dispensation, but a benevolent leader who can actually push for reforms and push for economic development of their countries. So maybe what Echo is trying to say is that Africa isn't ready for democracy. Maybe. Or what Dambisa Moyo said is that Africa isn't ready for democracy. Let's have a leader, whether he's there for 20, 30 years, for as long as they are benevolent and they care about the interests of the people. Because after all, we spend so much money in elections. We spend so much money in electoral democracy. Okay? Money which we borrow from the USA and Russia and World Bank and IMF. So do you think that Africa is actually not ready for a multi-party dispensation? What we need is a military leader who has the interests of the people at heart and can push for economic reforms and take the country forward.
Well, Comrade Kidega.
Oh, you still think we should continue with the Western democracies?
No.
Of elections.
Well, I don't know how we would arrive at that leader. Perhaps we would lock them in a room. They fight with spears, and whoever comes out of the room, that is the leader. Because whereas perhaps voting and the use of the ballot is not the most perfect, it is better than any known to us. Because that benevolent leader must be reached at in a certain way.
Through consensus.
Yeah, through consensus. And that consensus perhaps might be through an election or through a council. How do we arrive at that council? Okay. Somehow it will always take us back to the people.
Yeah.
I want to disagree partly about economics and politics. We have countries that have had worse, or that even have worse development indexes than many of these African countries that have had coups.
Yes.
And yet those countries that are worse economically have had no coups. They have had their leaders transitioning from one to another through democratic processes. They are not doing well economically, maybe. I think it goes back to how power is handled from country to country. Maybe we could apportion some blame to how power also transitioned back to the African after some centuries of colonialism. Because a system of subjugation, take for instance the colonial system itself, always tends to concentrate power in force and not in logic. So you find in many of these countries, their militaries or at the time of independence, the armed groups had more power, were more equipped, because they had been working for the colonialists.
Yes.
They were more equipped than the civilian masses.
Like we had the Rifle Army here in Uganda?
Yeah, we had the King's Rifle.
Yeah, King's Rifle.
Yeah.
rather.
We had many armed groups.
Mm.
The Obotes were good propagandists who had rallied the masses, but they didn't have actual power. That is why it was easy.
Actually, I think Idi Amin was part of the King's,
Yeah,
King's Rifle. Yeah?
he had the army, he had the Maje. Okay, so many of these, that's why you see the army played a very big role. Even at the time of independence, it were the Africans who had gone
Abroad
to fight in the World War, who came back and actually pushed in the
Revolution.
decolonization struggle. And then at the end of that struggle, they had more power. They were more equipped, they were more exposed and all that than the civilian leaders, than many of the civilian leaders. So in as far as military-civilian relation is concerned,
Yes.
we've seen that in many, I want to bring the concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that the people themselves will always struggle for basic survival. Okay, things like food, things like water, shelter, and if those things are not guaranteed, then perhaps they will go on the streets. Maybe they will, maybe they will not.
Someone told me it's difficult to fight a hungry man.
Yeah. So after that, people tend to seek security. And in many countries which have had a history of conflict, people find more confidence in armed men than in civilians to give them that sort of security.
Okay.
That is why you will hear it on the streets around Uganda, people saying, I would rather trust General this because at least he has experience, he has been in the army, notwithstanding what he espouses or what that person espouses
and what he stands for
in the growth of in the actual growth of democracy.
Yes.
So
yeah, fair enough. I think I pick your point, but just to support you, it is true that when survival becomes at the center of man's instincts, the law takes a second place.
Yeah.
But yes,
because you cannot tell people who are in war that power is changed through the ballot.
Yes, and yet
because there and then in that situation, all
survival.
they need is to survive.
Yes.
And if a general is going to bring 10,000 men, they are going to follow that general.
That is true. Anyone who can guarantee
them security in that moment.
Thank you. Apo, Comrade Roy, in his earlier submission, the first submission, brought in an aspect of human rights, and so did ECHO as well, the aspect of human rights. I will tell you that when there is civilian disobedience, for example, on the streets of Khartoum, lives are lost, okay? And everyone has a right to life, a right to property, okay? When there is all these insurgencies, people lose property and lose lives. So could you attach for us how this civil, disobedience alongside the military coups have an impediment on the rights of people?
Thank you so much. Just like he explained, there are those fundamental rights which are inherent, which we are born with, that they're so automatic, they're not granted by the state. Like our right to life. Any reasonable person would respect that right. You get? Be it the armed forces, be it the civilians, everyone wants who doesn't want to live? Everyone wants to live. And now the question which you're posing of saying that balancing the civilians' rights and then the armed forces, the officers in their business, in line with their business. One, we say that when these riots happen, most people lose their lives, which is not right. Which is really not right. But again, you cannot completely blame the officers. Why? I know most people will be like, even the viewers can react on that and be like, who even supports officers? I know it is really hard, but on reality, we see that, let me give an example where a police officer, there is a riot, and then officers come in to stop the riot or to do what? Some people are violent. They are so violent that you need to go hard on them. But still the officers, what they tend to forget, they are overtaken by their human nature, not their profession or what they are ought to do. They use excessive force, which is not right. Even the law condemns excessive force. Yes, you want to stop the riot, but how are you stopping the riot? So you find that there is a confusion now there in an officer executing their duties on a civilian who is also violent, and now officer employs excessive force on a civilian.
Yeah.
I think we all need to understand this, that we should, I know when a person is rioting, they will not keep in mind like, I think I've gone far, because it is that human nature, it is human, it is human in you that you can now, you cannot control yourself at that particular point. That you cannot say, let me go and stone that building, but I'll make sure that glass doesn't break.
Yes.
It is hard.
Yes.
It is hard to control such actions and emotions when a person is overtaken by anger.
Yes.
So the same applies to the officers. When a person, for example, an officer has come to stop a riot and someone throws, let me say, fouls, like a stone or something, a stone is reasonable, or maybe something worse to them, they will use the same. But all in all, I think the core point is we should, which is, I know it is hard, we should always keep in mind that even the people we blame are human beings.
Yes.
But still, we shall not shy away from the fact that we cannot take away people's lives. I know there are officers, yes, I will not say it is the government, the officers in African countries who don't care about people's lives. They really don't care. And that is the fact that we should not even hide. Reason being, you see, when people are used, I think when people get used to using guns and all those materials, there is a way they develop an inhuman element in them that they feel like killing one person cannot take away the whole mass.
Yeah.
But what we should keep in mind is that we should not even kill one person, even if it takes like you should look for always prioritize saving lives than taking away lives.
Yeah.
It is a core point.
Fair enough. Nuguroi, I see you're burning.
Yeah, in the instance that such cannot be blamed on individual officers because it is in the DNA of that particular state that it came to be like that government is synonymous with violence.
Okay,
Right from the top
I am now
down.
seeing
Now
us.
that-
Just 1 second. I'm seeing us going to phase 2 of the conversation.
Yeah.
Gradually, but I will guide and request that we
Okay,
insist
okay.
on the issues of Africa first. We shall have time to talk about that.
Okay.
Just conclusively, I'll give you both a chance before we go for the break. David, my question to you is, Apophia has brought a very good perspective that the civilian military relationship, it must be there, it must exist. The people must have a relationship with the state. It's very important. Now, my question to you is that the state has a responsibility to protect its citizens. Like he said, when we elect a government in power, we empower it with the tools of state. You know, it's a social contract.
True.
So at times, maybe the military, being a tool of state, in their attempt to overthrow a legitimate government, could they be trying to protect the people from the legitimate government? Because in any case, that is their responsibility, to protect the lives, property of the citizens. So do you think that at times these coups are motivated by an aspect to protect the rights, property, and lives of the citizens, or they are entirely on selfish and personal motives?
Yes and no. But I like to maybe bend it a little bit this way. You see, let's use the simplest examples where we work, assuming we work. if you don't work, at least you study somewhere where there are rules and regulations.
Unemployment is at 68.
There's a general interest of that institution. So assuming the institution is called Uganda, which is a country, and Uganda has advertised for the position of president, our question should go back to what is the interest of Uganda in terms of national security protocols,
Yes.
In terms of national development plans,
Yes.
in terms of
Foreign policy.
yes, foreign. What is our interest as the country Uganda? You know, sometimes when we say we are going for a movie, people can go watching any other movie. But I picked something very important from one movie clip, which someone said, "Hey, there's been a bombing in this state, and we want to deploy on that soil." And this is like something from one of the most powerful nations in the world with security and all that. The question one person asks is that what is our interest? Does our country have interest in that country? Then why deploy there? So then once a country has an interest, they will base on that to set their democratic principles. Is it a 7-term limit? Is it a 5-term limit? You know? So that then answers the question of does democracy intermarry with economy? Yes.
I think it does.
But the institution must have its interest clearly stated. That we don't care whether it's President so and so ruling for the next 40 years, but our interest must be catered for. During the just concluded election, Kidega, you know, some of us have been in these activities. But me, I told someone that I don't care whether it's President Museveni. This is for the case of Uganda. I don't care whether President Museveni rules until he dies, but is he fronting the interest of Uganda? I don't care whether a second population were brutalized. Were they trying to disorganize Uganda? Like Uganda, is it a clear interest of the country? So what is our interest as a nation? Does everybody who go to vote understand the interest of the state? Or we are just here blaming the president and blaming whoever is in power? If the person has no clear job description, they will employ their own job description. And that's where I blame the country as Uganda.
Yes.
So we must state our interests clear.
Thank you.
Those two parts must intermarry.
Thank you very much. I'll have a follow-up question for you. Let me just conclude with Comrade Mugisha before we go for the break. Mugisha, in your earlier submission, you brought in the aspect of the economy. And I have read from scholars of great capitalism that liberal economies are actually the biggest representation of any democracy. That for people to be able to call themselves a democratic country, they must be able to develop economically, household income, and all that. So do you think it is important for us to say, yes, we are democratic, we go to elections every 5 years, we respect human rights, you know, all these good principles of democracy, like she was saying earlier on, but when people are poor? So what will democracy mean to Africans who are poor? So just answer that before we go for a short break.
Exactly. That's a very important point that we should actually always address as Africans. It should be a question that is always on the table. Because when you look at democracy, it seems to be a little bit myopic as compared to the economic development, which is usually long term. We are bringing in leaders for a period of 5 years, let's say. And actually some countries, it's 3, 4, or 5 years. These leaders that you're bringing, they are supposed to undertake development strategies that are over 20 or 30 years. For example, in Africa, let me give a classical example in Africa, because someone gets money, gets a lot so that they can help them in their campaigns, and then he's to stay in power for 5 years. What do you expect them to do in those 5 years? The first year will be for them to mobilize back those resources that he used in his campaigns. Yeah. Then the next 2 years, maybe he will be involved in policy making, and then the last 2 or the last year in office, he will be making sure that he gets back to office and he'll be back to politics. So realize that we need to analyze, we need to devise ways in which, well, democracy is a very good system, but is it tailor-made? Are the elements or the facets of democracy as the white man brought it to Africa, is it tailor-made for Africa? Can we sit on the table and devise ways in which we can make sure that most of those elements are actually favorable to Africa? And also in regards to our resources that we have. So the issue of economics and democracy, I think, is very fundamental. There's a question you asked about coups. I think there are good coups and bad coups.
Really? Wow,
True.
That's
Really?
interesting.
For example, in Africa, we have a challenge that most of these leaders that come into power, they don't obey or respect the rule of law. Yeah, they don't undertake really the elements of democracy and constitutionalism and rule of law, as she was explaining. So most of the coups that actually, for example, in Guinea, Alpha Conde being ousted out of power, it's because he tried to change the constitution and actually had changed it and extended his tenure, his term. Yes. So you realize that most of these leaders, if a leader, yeah, has abused the constitution, has abused the elements of democracy, and then there is a coup. I think to be termed as a good coup. But now the people who have the military personnel who have undertaken the coup should be able to undertake transition so that they take back the power to the people, which is very fundamental. But in the sense that they have taken over power and they stay, for example, I have such issues in Sudan. Actually, it's an issue that is still going on in Sudan, as well as Chad, for example. So we have an issue of well, if it is a good coup, but what will make it good is if the military leaders transit the power to the people. That's a very big issue that actually should be we should look at as well, where there is a good coup and
bad coups.
Bad coup.
Okay, thank you. Apple, I can see your hand is up, but you are going to allow Mugisha have the last word before we go for the break.
Yes.
And these last words were that there are good and bad coups, and at times these coups are in the interest of the people. That and much more after the break. Thank you for staying with us. Please feel free to put your comments on the comment section. Feel free to subscribe to this channel. Feel free to equally go ahead and tell us what you know or what you think about this conversation. From us to you, it's a short break. See you shortly after this. Bye-bye. Thank you very much for staying with us after this break, and we are glad that you're still following our conversation. Like I said, feel free to put your comments on the comment section. Feel free to subscribe to this channel so you can get our weekly dose of sense. We shall begin from where we had ended, and if I recall well, Comrade Eko Mugisha told us that there are good and bad coups. There are certain coups that are done with the people's interests at heart, and he did point out the example of which country was that again?
The Burkina Faso.
Burkina Faso coup. And then Comrade Apple, you had your hand up. Let me just give you a chance to make your submission, then we shall get way forwards regarding this particular matter.
Okay, thank you so much. I need to be educated on the bad and good coups, and then if a government is assumed in what they call a good coup, so in the due course it desists from its interests. Does it cease being one, or it continues as a good one? Or I need to be educated about that. And do you relate the good and bad one in line with interest, or what do you base on to judge that this is a good one, this is a bad one?
Okay, 1 minute to respond.
Okay, going back to I think to the law, we have to take a stand. The African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance stipulates clearly that any unconstitutional takeover of a government is prohibited, rejected, and condemned. That's the stand that we take as a continent. That being said, there are some coups that we have looked at, and actually they tend to be reflecting the interest of the people. One of them was Guinea. When Alpha Conde was being assessed by the military, people went to the streets to celebrate. Now, what will make it a good coup is after the coup, then there should be a transition of power back to the people. We were seeing that in Sudan as well. What happened in Sudan? There was an uprising because, of course, the economic status of the country. Then the military came and intervened, and al-Bashir was overthrown. But now the challenge, what will make it a good coup, because right now there has not been a full transition of power to the people. What will make it a good coup is such a leader who has not been democratic, who has abused the constitution, he's ousted by a coup. What will make it a good coup is if there is a peaceful transition of power back to the people who are the sovereign. That I'll term it as a good coup. That being said, we stand by the law. Any unconstitutional takeover of a government that is unconstitutional is prohibited, rejected, and should be condemned.
Yes, thank you very much. Comrade Roy, let me just pick up from where Ndugu Mugisha has stopped on the aspect of Guinea. When Kano, what's his name again? Mamadou Doumbia took over from Alpha Conde, what happened was that the African Union actually did suspend the junta from the African Union, but also ECOWAS went ahead to issue a strong statement and suspended Guinea out of ECOWAS. Do you think that these institutions, African Union, ECOWAS, do they have a role to play in terms of maintaining peace and security, but also in terms of emphasizing the aspect of democracy and keeping legitimate legitimate governments in power? Or there are any other international institution like the United Nations whose role is simply to foster the interests of maybe powerful African countries or even the interests of certain Western powers? So speak to the aspect of the role of these international organizations, the African Union and ECOWAS, but also you'd want to also draw perspective of the East African community as well, since we have Sudan experiencing the same thing.
Thank you very much, Comrade Kidega. Perhaps I do not agree that there is any bad or good coup, and also in the same vein agree with Comrade Mugisha about only legitimate power being recognized and hailed. So in the in the sense of Uganda, we have our constitution that is very clear about how to get rid of illegitimate power, and that is under Article 3. We are under obligation to raise up and reject any authority that overthrows the constitution, overthrows the supremacy of the people. We don't necessarily need the army to do it for us.
Does the same article go ahead to define the mode of uprising?
No, it says you do anything humanly possible, anything as a Ugandan.
So meaning, are you saying that
in the name of protecting the constitution,
Comrade Roy,
you do anything that is within your power.
Can even employ
Comrade Roy, just to draw in the legal minds, you know, Comrade Mugisha and Comrade Apple, is what Roy is telling us is that the constitution actually, I would say, legitimatizes uprisings and use of, extraordinary
people's uprising.
Popular
mass uprising.
Okay.
Not military coups. Actually, military coups are in the category of the kind of power that we should raise against. If in any way they happen.
Because for the benefit of our viewers, I don't want them to misunderstand it. Actually gives power to people to go and take
perhaps
guns and fight against,
maybe
our lawyers should clarify.
Perhaps
because the way Roy is putting it. Students who are here, when they might say,
perhaps as part of our civic obligation, we can give the citizens a task to look at their constitutions and interpret them in a way that their framers intended them to. Regarding the African Union and ECOWAS
and EAC,
I think many of these coups, like in Mali, 2011, the first Mali,
yes.
and there was a foiled coup in 2010 or 11 in Côte d'Ivoire, and others. There's Guinea-Bissau.
Yes.
We've seen them hand very, very weak resolutions regarding these things. They have not come out strong to
condemn.
not even to condemn, but to actively participate in the protection of legitimate power.
And I'll tell you
Perhaps
why.
one, because some of these coups have had popular support of the masses. Perhaps because these forces, the African Union and ECOWAS, have not implored the use of military action to,
but you see, that is my point.
undo.
That is my point. That the African Union and the United Nations don't have. There is no international army. There is no African army. There is no African parliament.
No, there is a West African army.
Really?
Is it called
where
ECOMOG?
Where all the West African states contribute. Well, the point is that the sovereignty of these countries is supreme. And the African Union can only intervene for as long as it doesn't impede on the sovereignty of these independent states.
No, we've seen the African Union come out to hand in sanctions to some of these countries.
Economic sanctions.
But then it becomes hard when some of these coups have been successful in neighboring countries. Take, for instance, Guinea, Mali, and Burkina Faso. So even when you hand in economic sanctions, where 3 military rulers have taken over power through coups, they can still trade amongst themselves. And then these sanctions are not as effective. Okay? Then in some countries, we've seen the African Union simply not saying a word. Okay? I think for these bodies to be more effective, they must perhaps shake themselves from the aspect of African leadership camaraderie, where these people just meet in Addis Ababa to take tea and sleep, but be active participants in take, for instance, in the coup of Miriam Mengistu against Emperor Haile Selassie. We didn't see the African Union coming out strongly. And during the Red Terror that happened immediately after the coup and within all those years, we don't see the position of the African Union strongly against these things. Perhaps those quietnesses against the overthrow of the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, the Abdel Nasser, Gamel, the silence and sheer lack of action from these regional and continental body gave more confidence to the likes of Amin. That if it could be done anywhere, it can be everywhere.
Thank you, Nduguroi. That was very elaborate. Eko, I see your hand is up, but as you come to respond, let me just put to you this question as well, so that we can shift gears to Ndugu David. You've heard what Comrade Roy is saying, but let me take you back to 1918, when Woodrow Wilson, as USA President, introduced or fostered the argument of League of Nations. And the idea was that because the Western world had been in turmoil for a very long time, the Peloponnesian War, all those Greek wars and all that, insurgents, they then resolved that let's have a League of Nations, which is today the United Nations. And the idea was, how can we collectively work towards a common security agenda as Europe? Okay, so do you think that the African Union adopted just a model from the League of Nations or from the United Nations? Because the UN is actually very ineffective. If you look at, for example, right now, Russia is advancing aggression against Ukraine, but the United Nations has been quiet about it. So do you think that even the African Union is just any other body like the United Nations, and they are not effective? And that is why we see uprisings and coups taking place and nothing's done about it.
I definitely agree, because one of the aspects that we look at when we talk about the African Union first of all, is the administration, the leadership.
Yes.
Look at the leadership, the former chairpersons of the African Union. Well, we have Alpha Conde. We have Paul Kagame. I said I won't mention names, but let me mention for this particular case.
And the current is
we have
Tshisekedi?
yes, we have Kagame was one of them. Al-Madal Al-Fati of Egypt.
Yes.
Most of them came by coup.
Yes.
By military coup.
Yes.
Yes. So you question, why should we have the chairperson of the African Union as a president of maybe an incumbent in a certain country?
Yes.
It's the shape. Even Mugabe was actually once the chairperson. So when you look at the headship of such an organization, then you have to question its implementation of some of these things. That's why you find that they are not proactive. When you look at some of these nations where these military coups have actually happened, first of all, there was abuse of rule of law and constitutionalism. Most of them were changing the constitution to entrench themselves in power. The African Union and any of those region bodies didn't come out to say anything. They come out later. ECOWAS, the economic community of West Africa, has not been. Didn't even come out during Alpha Conde changing the constitution in Guinea. It came out later after the military coup, imposing sanctions on Guinea and Mali. So you find that there's no political will really to defend what some of these charters stipulate. So you find that there's a lack. Why should we have incumbents or presidents of countries, and mostly those that have come by military coup or illegitimate ways,
being
chairpersons of the African Union?
Fair enough. Good question. Ndugu David, earlier on in your submission, you emphasized the argument that whether these countries are monarchies or democracies, it doesn't matter. For as long as they have the interest of the people at heart, they can, hold those offices. So do you think that Africa, do you think we are anywhere close to the end of coups, or this is just the beginning?
Thank you.
Because there are 54 countries in Africa.
Thank you for that concern.
So
Thank you for that concern. Yes, we are many people in Africa with diverse background, different mode of operations and conducting of business in different countries. The Arab countries that are attached to Africa, and of course the other countries. South Africa in its own way, where with some of us think South Africa is part of some other world.
Yes.
Because of the economic differences and the growth.
Yeah.
But back to your concern and to ECOM's concern in regards to the bodies that regulate leadership in African countries.
Yes.
You talk about African Union. We can even talk about the UN in the case of Ukraine and Russia.
Yes.
Or you can talk about all those others that trade.
Yes.
Now, you do not expect an association of some people fighting the very members of the association. It's going to be quite difficult. So you find that the African Union, as you
the big boys club.
It's the big boys club. So these gentlemen meet to discuss, are you coming back to power? Or who is disturbing you?
Yes.
It's possible they could be discussing that.
Yes.
You find that now the very person who is so friendly to the chair has been attacked. That's where maybe they will respond very well. But if you are not a good friend to the comrades and you are attacked, maybe that's where they keep quiet for the case of those countries where there's nothing done. It's like, oh, let that man go, you understand? But how do we then fight those irregularities? Just like I'll take it back, me, I'm an administrator. You take it, let's take it back to an organization setup or a company or a business where you do not have a system that control finances. That means that the company is fragile. You're going to lose either finances or people are going to take advantage of those loopholes and then do their own things. There's a case scenario that I saw this time round in my village for something to talk about African democracy, which I believe could have existed even when kings were there.
Yes. Some
powers of those kings were somehow regulated, or powers of people using arms For the case of Africa, our arms are bows, arrows, those things that we had.
Yes.
But even there were strong regulations against users of those arms, you know. So how do we then go and set systems? As somebody who comes from innovation topics and trying to create, I'll leave it out for the viewers and for some of the decision makers in these countries that we live in. That most probably we need to revisit the membership of African Union, some of these organizations. We need to think about maybe former leaders with good performance records could take up just to protect the sovereignty of Africa.
Yes.
Or businessmen or people who are of good
Moral fabric.
character and
Yes.
moral standing orders in Africa could take up those positions so they
Neutral
can make
person.
justifiable
So that
decisions.
is more of a recommendation.
That's a recommendation. For the case of sovereignty of independent countries,
Yes.
we know that democracy yet is a bit fragile. You give power to one David Oyet, and now he's the commander in chief, so he can
So
reshuffle this,
power
do
at times
that.
gets to us.
So now it becomes contagious. I tend to feel big, and start to do my own thing. But I also would suggest that let there be some sort of a committee. A committee that represents the people and is independent. It's not parliament, it's not the ruling government. And we have a similar committee here in Uganda. It's called the Elders Council. But I think this Elders Council is somehow, I do not want to question their activity. I don't know how they operate. But we do have a similar Elders Council. They meet, they give guidance to the state. But we should have a more empowered body that can guide the people and control those popular uprising. We do not want people just being mobilized by anyone and they decide to uprise against the state.
Thank you.
So for me, those are the potential views that in terms of recommendations to people who hope to run states or run countries.
Many thanks. Fair enough. Apo, do you want to make a final comment regarding this African matter, or we can shift gears?
Yeah, I just have a few things to comment on. Actually, I wanted to first clear what you put to the viewers on the Constitution is not confusing, it's not contradictory in any manner. Article 3, yes, is in the Constitution, but it is the same Constitution which condemns such actions, the military actions, the use of force. So it has no any contradictions, just to clear that. It is very clear, it condemns them, and it does not credit anything of such as an act to be done recognized by the Constitution. Any action which is against human rights, which is in line with abuse of rights, which is against the abuse of the Constitution itself, it is condemned and it is so unconstitutional. And then when it comes to the general reasoning of those African Union and those other bodies that regulate that are put in place that would be regulating Africa in general, and that would help Africa to overcome these military coups and all that and the attacks, just like many of these people have discussed. You cannot. We need to have a neutral person in chair who is going to oversee. Not, for example, how sure are you that the chair is not even participating in that coup?
Or that the chair is not
yes. How sure are you?
So are you saying that we should adopt the United Nations approach?
Yes.
Where the Secretary General is appointed from outside
a
of
very
the
neutral
membership,
person, or like not even necessarily a politician. Someone who is very neutral, who they should actually have one on merit. And someone who is very responsible, whom they are very sure that that person cannot take any side. And even the cabinet that they have, just like he suggested, which will oversee the actions of these different presidents in different countries in Africa as a whole, so that we can have a smooth running and democracy is exercised and Africa is stable.
Fair enough. Mugisha, just 1 minute, then we can shift gears.
Thank you very much. I agree exactly, especially in regards to the leadership of the African Union. It ought to be revised. We need an independent person, someone who is not political. I believe it would work out. But on a general view about the military coups in Africa, we had, I believe along the military coups, some years back, we had the Arab uprising, where
Arab
we
Spring.
had Muhammad
Hosni
Abu
Mubarak.
Azizi setting himself on fire. And the reason why he was setting himself on fire is because of the standards of living had become very sad for him, that he couldn't even sustain his family. So it means that there is no way, and that led to an uprising, which ousted actually the incumbent president then. So this is why we need to concentrate mostly, and we look at the economic status, the economic development of a country. So as Africans, we need to put priorities, but most especially if we are to merge the economy as well as the democracy. Like I said, we find that our democratic policies are more myopic, yet the economic development are actually long term. But we need to merge those two. We need to sit down on the table and devise democratic ways in which we can ensure that actually our economic stand are in line with our democracy, or the democracy in line with the democratic element.
Yeah.
That being said, we should have leaders, and we should have one of the measures that I would actually recommend is we should educate the electorate. Yeah, the fact that universal suffrage is an element of democracy. Let's educate people whom to vote. They shouldn't vote on sentiments. They should vote people who will facilitate the economy to grow, who will bring strategies and policies that will bring about economic development. Until we do that, the chicken will always come back to roast. Thank you very much.
Fair enough, fair enough. To our viewers, that marks the end of phase 1. And at this point in time, I'll shift gears straight to phase 2. And that's on the issue of human rights here in Uganda. I must say that Uganda as a country took fundamental steps towards the protection and upholding of human rights. We were able to ratify so many international treaties and conventions against, human rights and things like that. For example, in 1985, we did ratify the International Convention Against Discrimination of Women. We went ahead at the domestic level to enact an entire chapter in the Constitution, Chapter 4, around the fundamental protection of human rights. And let me just quote this particular article. Are they called articles? Article 24, which says that respect for human dignity and protection from inhumane treatment. Then Article 44, Section or Subsection A, is it Section A?
Sabbatical.
Section A says that freedom from torture and cruel, inhuman, and derogating treatment or punishment. So these are very good laws. If, on paper, they're very good laws. We actually condemn torture, on paper. But the videos and the images that, ran social media a couple of weeks ago or a couple of days ago were quite disturbing, I must say. And we saw, the parliamentary opposition leaders marching out of parliament as a protest to, demonstrate their dissatisfaction with the issue around torture. Comrade Apo, what is going on? Do you think that we have lost track as a country regarding the respect for human rights, detainee torture, who is doing all this?
Okay. As a lawyer in the making, I would still say human rights in Uganda to some extent is abused. And we say that Uganda has good laws, good written laws. And I do not know whether the problem is because these laws were incepted, or I don't understand whether the people who really incepted these laws and the laws they draft really mean them to serve the purpose they are drafted for. Yes, we will have to always speak about reality, that human rights in Uganda, it is still lacking. We are seeing there are many activists who come up to fight, for example, rights of women, human rights on torture and all that. But still, I will still talk about, let me first give an example of rights of women. Many people have advertised, and I will thank the system that they have now appreciated the rights of women to some extent, not of course that they have fully appreciated, but you see that in companies they even prioritize women. They can be even given good seats in politics very well. But still, we are seeing there are many people who are still having that patriarchal thinking about the women and all that. And they are still used. Let me give an example. You go to get a job and people will not look at you on merit. They will just want to use you for you to get that job. We still have such cases. So in that manner, affirmative action is still a question. Yeah, and then when it comes to brutality, we see that there are many cases in Uganda, and we really have to still talk about this as many times as we can to see it improved. There are many cases. I'll say there is if I may use that, there is misuse of power by officers. They are meant to protect the state, to protect the citizens from such actions, but to some extent they use the same forces to go against their mandates. I would largely blame this because on individuals, the officers,
not the institution.
Not the institution. Yes, because we see that there are many. For example, the president of Uganda, even himself, every time he comes, he blames torture. We see officers, ministers blaming the same. For example, this honorable,
the Attorney General.
Even no, this minister, Variumos. When he came, he talked about people who torture, who carry out such actions should be put to book. So they should be put on record, and they should actually go the same. They should they should serve the purpose of their actions or why they act in such a manner. So we see that institutions are trying to do away with these actions, but cases. Still individuals have not appreciated this. I think it all goes to individuals that they should not at one point forget their mandate, that they are meant to protect the state, not to mistreat citizens, to abuse citizens' rights, to brutalize the civilians. They should work in line with that, because even the Constitution itself condemns use of excessive force. Maybe, even if they are carrying out their mandate, they should limit their force in carrying out such.
Maybe just for the benefit of our viewers, you might need to rephrase and that the military and the security institutions are not established to protect the state because they are the state.
Yes.
They are there to protect the people.
Yes, they're the people, sorry, not the state.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Nduguroi, you are the General Secretary of the students of this country. I read somewhere that Kakwenza is actually a student somewhere. And I was seeing online his back and those images, and it was disturbing. How did UNSA receive these images, and what have you done ever since about it?
It is very absurd that Kakwenza, a third-year student of law at Canvendish University, suffered this. Okay, it is condemnable, not only by UNSA, but every person of good standing in this country and in this world. Perhaps to understand torture, one needs to understand the nature of the man in charge. Mzee Amos, may his soul rest in peace, the Mzee Amos Kaguta, narrated one time that his son was in school, and the colonialist teacher removed his cap and put it on his dog. In the evening, the colonialist, the head teacher, found his dog murdered and cut into very many pieces. Mr. Museveni, in the first version of his book, Sowing the Mustard Seed, discusses at length torture, and dark images of murder and brutality and how they can be used to consolidate and to keep power. He gives case studies from his experiences in the war in Mozambique that the fighters would get very energized whenever they arrested an enemy soldier and slaughtered him into very many pieces. And he writes it in such a way that excites him. Okay? So today we have the same man who comes on TV and says, my boys, this Bobby Wine, they beat him up very properly. So torture, the use of this crude brutality is in the DNA of the system. It cannot be taken away from the system because that's how it is established. This is how it comes to be. Torture is the being of this government, if we can call it a government. Then we remove, I mean, no wonder, I think that's why God brought them into power on the very day as Amin. Okay? So they come in, there is a State Research Bureau headquarters. Do they build something else? No. They just change its name to ISO. Same place, same torture chambers to represent what they stand for and how they are going to keep themselves into power. You see, the man loves violence so much that he will get skulls and put them all over the road in Luwero, all over the place, for people to come and see how murderous, how torturous it can be, or he can get. Okay. So the likes of Kakwenza, the likes of the Ingrid Turinawes, when they get them and beat them on the street, the brutality that Canvendish had to go through in every election cycle, day in, day out, is characteristic, is fundamental to the being. I think it's, they get orgies. He gets orgies from, okay, from watching this brutality.
Thank you. Fair enough. Fair enough. David, let me come to you. David, the issue of human rights. We all have a right, okay? And the Constitution and Thomas Hobbes will tell you that you can exercise your rights, yes, for as long as you don't infringe on the rights of others. So do you think people like Kakwenza, in their expression of freedom to speak, right to, say whatever you feel you can say, did they infringe on the rights of others? And I'm not saying that he should have been treated the way he was treated, but all I'm saying is, at times, do we exercise our freedoms and rights at the expense of the rights of others?
Before I say something in relation to torture and the case scenarios of the Ingrids and the recent one being Kakwenza, I would like to, guide the viewers a bit in relation to some of the submission Roy made, referring to the president. The current president has, being the system. I think there's a difference between the president, the person, and then Uganda with its system of governance. So systems are different from personalities. And so I would not like our viewers to think that Museveni is the system. Uganda has its own system of governance, and we have tools that we use to run the system. And some of these tools is the constitution, the Ugandan constitution.
Which is supreme.
Which is the supreme tool, actually, that governs the system. As to whether President Museveni has operated on the contrary, I think it's an opinion that Roy can attest to into details. But yes, there has been incidences where we felt like certain things have been handled to the extreme.
Yes.
For the case of how our fellow student has been tortured. This is a third-year law student. I mean, to beat a man up to that extent, he must have committed a grave offense. And if he did so, there's got to be other avenues of addressing that, including life in prison. I think if you have something very grave that you've done, as opposed to being beaten up like that. I would want to say that there's no occasion or there's no amount of offense that would justify torture. You know, sometimes people commit offense and they do all sorts of things that they have done. But I think there's got to be alternatives. As an innovator, I would not want to again, you know, propose or recommend. I did that in the first round of topics, but I think there could be other ways. We just have to mastermind how. Also, we should look at the speed of dispensing justice.
Okay.
How fast do you go around somebody who has committed an offense?
Okay.
If it takes you 2 weeks and there's not even a simple evidence for a preliminary trial, I think you've got to think twice, just so people have freedom to be tried. As to whether people misuse their rights, like you said on Kidega, that people tend to over-exercise their rights. I think as human beings, we've got to have respect for each other. We've got to have respect for each other in a way that when we are offended, how do we approach that? You know, in a civilized culture, in a cultured world, how do you approach the person who has offended you? We need to also be careful not to, you know, put our opponents onto the extreme. More so when they have power and authority. I'm saying this for my fellow young people.
So you're saying they should play safe. They should play safe.
It's like attacking a man with a gun because you think he has offended you. I think sometimes we need to be calculative in the things we say and what we do. But we also would like the armed men to respect people's rights as well.
Fair enough. Ndugu Mugisha, you're a law student. I'll tell you that I think Article 54 establishes the Human Rights Commission. And the subsequent articles actually empower it with the mandate to actually summon errant officers who are maybe perceived to be abusing human rights. Let's speak to the aspect of the strength and the mandate of the Human Rights Commission. Do you think it has teeth to bite, or it's just any other institution in the country?
Thank you very much, Moses. Surprisingly, the Constitution, and more so that particular provision, it gives actually the Human
Rights Commission,
Rights Commission such powers. It actually has powers equivalent to that of the High Court. But you find that they don't do anything about it. There's a lot of abuse. There's a lot of abuse of human rights. But the Commission doesn't do as it is empowered by the Constitution. The issue of torture is barbaric. It's very unacceptable. Maybe I could quote one of the scriptures in the Bible. David at one point, because he was being pursued by his own people, he said that if it was my enemy, I would understand. But it is you, my brother. So the fact that we torture our own, it beats human dignity. And the thing is, when you're torturing someone, you forfeit your own human dignity, because that's the same treatment that you're giving, and you're making life, which is sacred, to be of no value. So I believe it is something that the Human Rights Commission should come out and condemn, because it receives over. I was reading one of the reports of the Commission. It receives over 300 cases of torture, but you never hear anyone being brought to or justice being given to these victims. We have the Anti-Torture Act. We have the Prevention and the Prohibition Act. All these are laws that are put in place that can actually protect these victims. These victims can be compensated. The superiors, leave alone the subordinates who are involved in this act, but the superiors as well. Section 10 of the Prevention and Prohibition Act says that actually it's the superior, it should be responsible, should be held responsible. As much as it's hard for us to identify the subordinates who are involved in this act, the superiors of those subordinates ought to be brought to the law, and justice should be served.
Maybe just to add on to your point, there is something called the deep pocket theory. that the person
Yes.
who has the deeper pocket should extend the olive branch. So maybe your point is that the institutions and the higher authorities should be able to respect, the laws.
Yes,
For
definitely.
there to be, mutual understanding.
Yes.
Fair enough.
And lastly, maybe also the judiciary. The judiciary should come out and condemn such acts.
True.
And they have a role to play as well. Yeah. So we pray that all of the bodies of government should come and condemn such acts, and especially the judiciary. We would love to see something being done by the judiciary in regards to this torture.
Fair enough.
Yes, thank you.
One time someone said that Uganda does not lack the laws, but the spirit of constitutionalism. Well, fair enough. I'll take the final comments. Our time is fast spent. So I'll begin with you, Comrade David, Comrade Roy, then I'll come to you, Ndugu Echo, then I'll conclude with the lady on the panel. So your final remarks in just maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, panelists. Thank you, our host for today, and the viewers. The topic we're discussing here is not only to the politicians, like I said in the beginning, and much as you've heard us speak and make comments, we still do not stand as the masters of the topic. All of you have your views you could still share, like the host said in the comment section to this video. My appeal to everyone and to the panelists is that let's try to observe some of those loopholes that we see in governance, in democracy, in development of our countries. Let's speak up to those who make the decisions, more so the lawmakers. Let's set systems or let's advocate for systems that would control and regulate the powers of those that we do entrust with the powers. So we get to shape our country, our nation, our continent as Africa, and we see some sort of a significant change that would bring about social development, economic development, and political development itself. I don't have much to say to this, but I'd like to say thank you to all my colleagues and to the viewers.
Thank you, Ndugu Roy.
Thank you so much, comrade. I think many people around the world, and particularly around the Ugandan political space, could be asking themselves, is this government a democracy that is failing into a dictatorship? Or was it a dictatorship that has failed to work itself into democracy? Perhaps we can look at where it all began. Someone came to power and told everyone that in 4 years they would organize an election and give power to the people. They didn't. It took them 10 years. They banned the constitution. They banned all political parties in all those 10 years. So they were acting as the alpha and omega. I don't think that was a democrat that is growing into an autocrat that we are seeing today. Perhaps we should have listened better then. But we still have a chance to do our civic duty as we are called upon by Article 3 of the Ugandan Constitution, to take power to ourselves. The power that protects an institution like Parliament from being raided and members of Parliament beaten and bonds broken inside the chambers of the House. Power that protects courts of law from being raided by black mambas on an afternoon. Power to the people. That is in Article 1 of the Constitution. Fellow Ugandans, I would like to thank you for watching this show. Perhaps you've had many calls, and I would like to make an additional call continue raising to enlarge the spaces of civic engagement, because all dictatorships thrive on narrowing spaces for citizens, spaces that give them information, and spaces that give them economic liberation. So I understand the challenges you're facing, more so economic. It is also a tool of the dictatorship to have you unable to mobilize, to organize, and to rise. Thank you. May God bless this country.
Fair enough. Comrade Mugisha, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Moses, for hosting me. Maybe my issue is in regards to I'll love to call everyone, especially those that are incumbent or the government. We should exercise tolerance as a democratic society. Democracy comes at a price, so we should be able to exercise tolerance. We accept critique and scrutiny, because these are some of the accountability measures that we call upon our leaders to listen to, so that we can air out our views. It is sad what is happening in the western parts of the continent, and we hope it does not reach this side, and we ought to watch. So that it does not, because it's like fire. When your neighbor's house is burning, you ought to pay attention. So we ought to pay attention.
The wind can easily blow the fire.
Exactly. So the winds are roaming all over Africa, but we pray and we call upon those that are in government to watch and exercise democracy and rule of law. We believe with rule of law, we won't have such issues.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Comrade Apo, you have the privilege to give us the final words.
Thank you so much. I don't know whether I'll have much to say with what all these guys have said. Yeah, I want to thank so much the panelists and the person and the host today. Thank you so much, and our viewers, our good viewers today. There are many people who have come up. There are many activists, but let's not. Everyone is an activist, by the way. You can still fight for people's rights. You can still raise. You can still. This country belongs to all of us, not only individual persons. Let's not prioritize politicians. Everyone can speak on their own behalf. Since we go to the power, we can exercise the powers, and we see that democracy is exercised. And my other cry goes out to the judiciary, as we see that with what is happening, it makes us doubt the independence of the judiciary. Yet the Constitution gives powers to the judiciary to exercise its functions as an independent body, but where there are several interruptions from the different organs of government, it really questions the judiciary's independence, and we really feel that democracy is not exercised. But as a country, we pray for democracy, we pray for rule of law, we pray for respect of human rights and exercise of human rights, and for the officers in charge, for the state persons, we pray that we really respect human rights, whether on individual capacity or institutions capacity, because we all realize that yes, an individual can act on behalf of the state. We don't want to exempt the state because there is vicarious liability. But even individuals, when you're exercising your duty, when you're executing your duties, let us be mindful of the rights of the civilians, of the rights of people. We all have rights which are granted to us by the Constitution, and we have our inherent rights. So let us keep these rights respected. Let us respect one another, so that we can have good leadership, we can have a good country, which will help us develop economically, politically, and socially. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Many thanks. I must say to the panelists, you've been an amazing panel. Comrade David, you've been amazing. Ndugu Roy, very brilliant. Comrade Apo, very smart. Ndugu Mugisha, very eloquent. And I mean, you've all been an amazing panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Of course, to our unsung heroes, the producers, Ndugu Rashid and your team, thank you very much for staying up this late to ensure that our viewers get this show on time. To the viewers, thank you for always loving the Youth Roundtable. And from us to you, I leave you with just one quote, and that is from the late Bishop Desmond Tutu, who said that in whatever you do, wherever you are, just do right. Eventually, that right will overwhelm the world. Thank you. See you next week. Bye-bye.